You never cared about me.
That isn't true.
I'm done. Don't expect to hear from me again.
Please. I don't think you belong here.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but is this where Mrs. Davison lives?
Oh my God, you're back. Is that?
Mom, it's me.
My baby. My baby's home. Oh my God. I haven't seen this in years. What is this? What's going on?
My own daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "You're just a guest in my kitchen." I stood there in complete silence, my hands still dusted with flour from the biscuit recipe my late husband loved. Before I could answer, our contractor walked through the front door, carrying a worn metal tube he had found inside one of the walls. He looked around the room and asked, "Which one of you is Lucinda Hollister?" The moment I saw the faded blueprints with my signature beside my husband's, I realized the house was finally ready to tell the truth, and someone at that table was about to discover they had never really known who built it. If this story touches something in your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me until the end. Please like this video if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, and subscribe if stories about strength, dignity, and second chances mean something to you. Most of all, tell me in the comments, have you ever been treated like a stranger in a place that should have been your home? And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. If someone had asked me 10 years ago what my greatest achievement was, I wouldn't have pointed to the awards hanging in my old office or the magazine articles that once called me one of Oregon's most innovative residential architects. I would have driven them to a quiet neighborhood on the western edge of Portland, parked beneath the towering maple tree in front of a 2-story craftsman house, and simply said, "That." Every inch of that home carried a memory. Not because it was expensive, not because it was beautiful, because Thomas and I had dreamed it into existence long before the first foundation was poured. My name is Lucinda Hollister. I'm 67 years old, and until recently, I believed a home was the safest place a person's heart could ever rest. I learned how wrong I was. Thomas and I met in architecture school when we were barely 22. He liked to joke that he fell in love with me because I argued with one of our professors over roof loads during a structural design class. "You scared the poor man," Thomas had laughed years later. "I corrected him," I'd answered. "And that he'd grin is exactly why I married you." We spent 42 wonderful years together. Money was tight when we first married. We rented tiny apartments with paper-thin walls, repaired old furniture instead of buying new, and counted every dollar before grocery shopping. While other young couples dreamed about vacations or luxury cars, we collected graph paper architecture books and photographs of homes we admired. Every Friday night became our tradition. Instead of going out, we'd spread blueprints across the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee between us. We'd argue over staircases, window placements, ceiling heights, and kitchen layouts until well after midnight. Neither of us ever minded. Building houses wasn't simply our profession, it was our language. Nearly 30 years ago, after saving for almost 2 decades, we finally bought a quiet piece of land overlooking a small wooded park in Portland. The lot wasn't perfect. It sloped more than most builders wanted. The soil required extra preparation, construction costs were higher. But Thomas stood on that empty patch of grass, slipped his hand into mine and whispered, "I can already see our grandchildren running across this yard." That was enough. We never hired another architect. We became our own clients. For almost 18 months, we revised the plans dozens of times. Every doorway had purpose. Every hallway was intentionally wider than necessary. Every window was positioned to catch the afternoon light. Even the kitchen island had been measured so 2 people could cook without bumping into each other. Thomas insisted on that. "Marriage survives because nobody gets trapped in a corner," he'd joke while moving cabinets half an inch across another blueprint. I would laugh every single time. When construction finally began, we visited the site almost every afternoon after work. The builders soon learned that we noticed everything. A beam installed half an inch off. We saw it. A cabinet delivered in the wrong finish. We caught it. Electrical outlets slightly misplaced, already marked before anyone else noticed. Some contractors probably dreaded seeing us arrive. Others appreciated that we respected their craftsmanship. One of them even told us, "I've never seen 2 homeowners care this much." Thomas answered without hesitation. This isn't just a house. It's where our family is going to happen. Years later, our son Benjamin was already a teenager before I realized how completely those words had come true. His first steps happened in the living room. His high school graduation party filled the backyard. Christmas mornings overflowed into every corner of the house. Birthdays, Thanksgivings, late-night conversations after heartbreak. The kitchen became the center of all of it. It wasn't simply where meals were cooked. It was where apologies were accepted, dreams were shared, college applications were filled out, business ideas were born. Every important conversation somehow ended around that large oak island Thomas had insisted we build. He used to say kitchens weren't designed for cooking. They're designed for healing. 3 years ago, cancer took him from me far faster than either of us expected. During his final weeks, we still sat together in that same kitchen. He wasn't strong enough to drink coffee anymore. Sometimes he only managed a few sips of tea, but he would rest his hand on the countertop and smile. "You know," he whispered one afternoon, "this room turned out exactly like I hoped." I squeezed his fingers. "So did the man who dreamed it." He smiled. That became one of our final conversations. After Thomas passed away, the silence inside the house became almost unbearable. The refrigerator sounded louder. The clocks ticked harder. Even the floorboards seemed lonely. Friends visited. Neighbors checked on me. Benjamin called almost every evening. Still, the house felt impossibly large for one person. About 6 months later, Ben came over carrying takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant. He looked nervous throughout dinner. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mom," I smiled. "What is it?" He looked down at his plate. "Lauren and I have been talking." His wife Lauren had always been ambitious and energetic. She owned a small interior design business that had slowly begun attracting wealthy clients around Portland. She loved modern spaces, open layouts, and dramatic renovations. She was different from me, but different isn't always bad. "We were thinking," Ben continued, "you shouldn't have to live here alone." I looked at him carefully. "What are you suggesting?" He hesitated. "What if we moved in?" Lauren immediately leaned forward. "We could help maintain the house. You'd never have to worry about yard work or repairs, and we'd all be together." The offer sounded sincere. I didn't answer immediately. Part of me treasured my independence. Another part desperately missed hearing another voice inside these walls. Lauren reached across the table. "You wouldn't be alone anymore." That sentence reached straight into my grief. 3 months later, they moved into the upstairs bedrooms. The first weeks felt surprisingly wonderful. We ate breakfast together. Ben helped with small repairs around the property. Lauren filled the empty living room with fresh flowers every Monday. Sometimes we'd cook dinner together while music played softly in the background. For the first time since Thomas died, laughter returned to the house. One evening I found Ben standing in the backyard watching the sunset. "You were right," he quietly said. "About what?" He smiled. "This place still feels like Dad." I slipped my arm around his. "I hope it always will." "I think it will," he answered. At that moment, I truly believed our family had entered a new chapter. I believed we had found a way to carry Thomas's memory forward without losing one another. Looking back now, I realized the warning signs were already there. They were tiny, easy to dismiss. Lauren occasionally referred to rooms as our future renovation. She asked unusual questions about property records. She measured walls while pretending to plan new furniture. Sometimes I'd walk into the kitchen and find her quietly studying the ceiling beams with thoughtful eyes. When I asked what she was doing, she'd smile. "Oh, just imagining possibilities." I smiled back every time. After all, she was an interior designer. Why wouldn't she imagine possibilities? I had no idea those possibilities would one day make her believe she had the right to decide who belonged inside the very kitchen my husband and I had built together. The first change Lauren made seemed so small that I almost laughed when I noticed it. One Tuesday morning, I walked into the kitchen looking for my favorite ceramic mixing bowl, a cream-colored bowl with tiny blue flowers painted around the rim. Thomas had surprised me with it on our 15th wedding anniversary, after overhearing me admire it in a little pottery shop on the Oregon coast. I opened the cabinet where it had lived for nearly 20 years. It wasn't there. I checked another cabinet, then another. Finally, I found it tucked onto the highest shelf of the pantry, behind several brand new glass storage containers that Lauren had recently purchased. When she came downstairs, I smiled politely. "Lauren, have you seen my mixing bowl?" She looked up from her phone. "Oh, yes. I reorganized the kitchen yesterday." I blinked. "You reorganized it?" She nodded proudly. "It flows much better now." I laughed softly. "I suppose I just need to learn where everything is." "I'm sure you'll get used to it," she answered cheerfully. It sounded harmless. And maybe if it had stopped there, it would have been. But it didn't. Within 2 weeks, nearly everything had moved. The coffee mugs Thomas and I used every morning were replaced with sleek white mugs Lauren preferred. The old spice rack disappeared from beside the stove. Family cookbooks that had always rested on a wooden shelf near the window were packed neatly into decorative baskets inside the pantry. Even the cookie jar my mother had given me 40 years earlier vanished from the countertop. When I finally found it wrapped in newspaper inside a cabinet, Lauren smiled apologetically. It didn't match the aesthetic. The aesthetic. I rolled that word around in my mind for hours. Somehow it sounded more important than memories. One Saturday afternoon, I invited two longtime friends, Nancy and Carol, over for lunch. We had been meeting once a month for nearly 25 years. Nothing fancy: soup, sandwiches, homemade pie. Just enough to remind ourselves that friendship deserved protecting. As I prepared lunch, Lauren walked into the kitchen carrying several shopping bags. "Oh," she said, "I didn't realize you had company today." "I mentioned it on Wednesday." She paused. "I must have forgotten." Then she looked around the kitchen. "Actually," her voice changed. "Could you finish up by 1?" I stared at her. "Why, I have clients coming over at 2." "What kind of clients?" "I'm showing them some kitchen concepts." I frowned. "Here," she smiled. "It's just easier than renting a studio." I looked around the room. This wasn't planned. "It'll only take an hour." Nancy and Carol exchanged uncomfortable glances. I quickly forced a smile. "We'll be finished." But lunch no longer felt relaxed. Every few minutes, Lauren walked through the room measuring walls with a laser tool or taking photographs with her tablet. She wasn't rude. She simply behaved as though we weren't there. After my friends left, Nancy hugged me longer than usual. She whispered quietly into my ear, "Lucy." Only my oldest friends still called me Lucy. "Is everything all right?" I smiled automatically. "Of course." But she looked unconvinced. Driving away, she glanced back toward the house with worry written all over her face. That evening, I sat alone on the back porch watching the sun disappear behind the tall fir trees. Bun eventually joined me. "You okay, Mom?" "I am." He looked at me carefully. "You don't sound convinced." I hesitated. "Has Lauren mentioned using the house for client meetings?" He nodded. "A few times. I wish she'd talked to me first." "I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it." That became Ben's favorite sentence. "She didn't mean anything by it. She didn't mean to move my things. She didn't mean to schedule meetings. She didn't mean to change routines. She didn't mean—" Intentions, however, don't erase consequences. A week later, I discovered another change. The framed family photographs that had always lined the hallway connecting the kitchen to the dining room had disappeared. Pictures of Thomas holding baby Ben, our camping trips, Christmas mornings, graduations, anniversaries, gone. In their place hung oversized black and white prints of abstract architectural shapes. Beautiful, expensive, completely empty of us. When I asked Lauren where the photographs had gone, she answered while arranging flowers. "I packed them carefully." Packed them. They made the hallway feel cluttered. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Those pictures have been there for decades." "I know. They'll be perfectly safe." "Where?" "The attic." The attic. As though 40 years of family history belonged in storage. That night, after everyone went to bed, I climbed into the attic with a flashlight. The boxes were neatly labeled: family photos, dining room, kitchen decor. I opened one. Inside lay dozens of framed memories wrapped carefully in packing paper. Thomas smiling while grilling hamburgers. Ben covered in birthday cake frosting. Me laughing so hard that my eyes had nearly disappeared. I sat on the attic floor surrounded by those photographs for nearly an hour. I wasn't crying because they had been packed away. I was crying because nobody had thought to ask whether I was ready. Over the following month, Lauren's confidence inside the house grew stronger. She began referring to spaces differently. Instead of saying your living room, she said the front sitting room. Instead of your dining room, it became the entertaining space. Even the kitchen changed names. One afternoon, she spread several color samples across the island. I'm thinking warmer tones in this area. This area. The kitchen, I smiled. You mean our kitchen? She looked surprised. I suppose. Then she returned to her samples. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but something about that hesitation stayed with me. One evening, I started making chicken noodle soup from scratch. It had been raining all day, and the smell reminded me of countless autumn evenings Thomas and I had spent cooking together. Halfway through chopping carrots, Lauren entered carrying several grocery bags. She stopped abruptly. "Oh, I'm making dinner," I said. I noticed. There was an awkward silence. Finally, she sighed. "I was actually planning to cook tonight." I looked at the pot simmering on the stove. "I'm already halfway finished." She folded her arms. "I wish you would have told me." I smiled politely. "I've cooked dinner in this kitchen for nearly 30 years. I know. But now there are 3 adults living here." I nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll make enough for everyone." She hesitated before speaking again. "Maybe we should start using a shared calendar. A calendar. So we know who's using the kitchen." The words landed strangely. Who's using the kitchen? Not preparing dinner. Not cooking. Using. As though it were a conference room instead of the heart of our home. I agreed because arguing seemed pointless. Within days, a magnetic calendar appeared on the refrigerator. Lauren filled it with meal schedules, client appointments, cleaning rotations, even pantry organization days. I added only 2 things: Sunday pancakes, Thursday bread baking, the traditions Thomas and I had kept for decades. The following Thursday, I woke early, mixed the dough, and left it to rise beneath a linen towel. Around 10 o'clock, I returned to begin shaping the loaves. The bowl was gone. The dough was gone. Confused, I searched the counters until Lauren walked in. "Oh," she said casually. "I moved it." "You moved it." "It was taking up too much workspace." "Where is it?" "In the laundry room." I found the bowl balanced on top of the washing machine, where the dough had collapsed from the sudden temperature change. Hours of work were ruined. Lauren looked genuinely puzzled by my disappointment. "I didn't think bread was that sensitive." "It isn't just bread." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" I almost answered. I almost told her that every Thursday loaf carried Thomas's memory because he'd always stolen the first warm slice before it had cooled. Instead, I simply picked up the bowl. It doesn't matter. But it did matter. Every little change by itself seemed insignificant. A bowl moved, pictures packed away, rooms renamed, schedules posted. None of them were cruel enough to confront on their own. Together, however, they quietly whispered the same message day after day. This house was slowly being rearranged to fit a future in which I no longer belonged. And I still hadn't realized Lauren's biggest change wasn't going to involve the furniture. It was going to involve the walls themselves. I wish I could tell you there was one dramatic moment when I finally realized something was terribly wrong. There wasn't. It happened the way old houses develop cracks, quietly, almost invisibly. Until one day, you look closely and understand the damage has been spreading for a long time. The first unmistakable sign came on a rainy Wednesday morning. I had gone downstairs early, hoping to enjoy a peaceful cup of coffee before anyone else woke up. Rain tapped gently against the kitchen windows, while the maple tree outside swayed in the cool Oregon breeze. It reminded me of mornings Thomas and I used to spend reading newspapers across from one another without saying much at all. Some silences are comfortable. Those are the ones built on decades of love. As I reached for my favorite coffee mug, I heard voices drifting in through the partially open dining room window. At first, I assumed neighbors were walking past. Then I recognized Lauren's voice. Curious, I stepped closer. She wasn't outside. She was standing on the front porch speaking with someone. "I don't want my mother-in-law involved," she said. Another voice answered, a young woman's voice, professional, confident. "I understand," the woman replied. "But if we're changing structural walls, someone familiar with the original plans could be helpful." Lauren laughed softly. "The original plans are outdated. I've already decided what this house needs." I froze. Structural walls. The front door opened and both women walked inside before they noticed me. Lauren smiled as though nothing unusual had happened. "Good morning, Lucinda." "Morning." She turned toward the young woman beside her. "This is Emily Carter." Emily extended her hand warmly. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Hollister." I shook her hand. "You too." Lauren slipped off her coat. "Emily's helping me look at a few design ideas." I looked from one woman to the other. "What kind of design ideas?" "Oh, nothing major." Lauren answered so quickly that the words almost overlapped. "Just freshening things up." Emily hesitated. Her expression changed for the briefest moment, almost as though she wanted to say something else. Instead, she smiled politely. "We're just exploring possibilities." That phrase again. Possibilities. I had heard it several times over the past few months. For some reason, it no longer sounded exciting. It sounded dangerous. The two of them disappeared into the living room carrying rolled-up drawings. I remained standing in the kitchen staring at my untouched coffee. Something inside me whispered that I had just overheard the beginning of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Later that afternoon, Lauren left to meet a client. Ben was working upstairs. Emily remained in the dining room reviewing measurements on her laptop. As I carried fresh lemonade into the room, she looked up with a grateful smile. "Thank you. I thought you might need a break." She accepted the glass. "That's very kind." For several minutes we chatted about architecture. I discovered Emily had graduated from the University of Oregon only 8 years earlier. She admired Frank Lloyd Wright, loved restoring historic homes. Her enthusiasm reminded me of myself at 30. Finally, I couldn't resist asking. "So," she looked up, "what exactly are you helping Lauren renovate?" Emily hesitated. "I assumed she'd already discussed it with you." My stomach tightened. "Discussed what?" Emily looked genuinely uncomfortable. "The first floor remodel." I stared at her. "The what?" She immediately realized something was wrong. I'm sorry. I thought everyone knew." I forced myself to remain calm. "What remodel?" Emily slowly rotated her laptop toward me. There displayed across the screen was a digital floor plan of my home. Red lines crossed through walls. Blue notes labeled areas for demolition. The kitchen island was gone. The pantry was gone. One wall separating the kitchen from the dining room had been marked, "Remove." I couldn't speak. Emily frowned. "Mrs. Hollister." I finally managed to ask, "How extensive is this project?" She swallowed. "Lauren wants an open concept first floor. She believes removing these walls would create a better entertaining space." Entertaining space. Not family space. Not home. Entertaining. I stared at the drawing. It barely resembled the house Thomas and I had spent years creating. The breakfast nook where Ben had done homework. Gone. The built-in bookshelves. Thomas handcrafted. Gone. The pantry door where we'd measured Ben's height every birthday. Gone. Everything reduced to clean digital lines waiting to be erased. Emily quickly closed the laptop. "I'm sorry." "I truly thought this had already been discussed." I smiled politely. "It's not your fault." Inside, however, my heart had begun beating so loudly I could hear it in my ears. That evening, I waited until after dinner. Lauren cleared the dishes while Ben loaded the dishwasher. I remained seated. Can we talk? Lauren looked up. Of course. I met with Emily today. Her smile barely changed. Oh. She showed me the renovation plans. Silence. Bun looked from me to Lauren. What plans? Lauren answered before I could. I was going to tell both of you. When? She folded her arms. After everything was finalized. I looked directly into her eyes. Finalized. I wanted to avoid unnecessary stress. I took a slow breath. Lauren, you were planning to remove half the first floor. It's going to improve the house. You never asked me. She smiled patiently. I didn't think you'd be interested in construction details. Construction details. For a moment I wondered if she remembered what I'd done for 40 years before retirement. Perhaps she never truly listened when people talked about my career. Or perhaps she assumed retired meant irrelevant. Ben finally spoke. Wait. You're remodeling. Lauren nodded. I've been planning it for months. Ben looked surprised. I thought we were only replacing cabinets. Lauren sighed. The project evolved. He frowned. And you didn't tell me? I wanted everything organized first. I watched my son's expression carefully. He wasn't angry. He was confused. That somehow hurt even more. I quietly asked, have permits been submitted? Lauren blinked. I think so. You think so? The contractor is handling that. Who prepared the structural review? She hesitated. I'm not sure. I continued calmly. Did anyone compare the proposed layout with the original engineering drawings? Silence. Lauren finally shrugged. They're decades old. We're building for today. I looked at Ben. Do you know where the original plans are? He shook his head. I assumed you had them. So did I. Lauren picked up her water glass. Honestly, they're probably outdated anyway. That sentence settled over the room like cold fog. Outdated. The same word she'd used that morning. After dinner, I walked alone to Thomas's old study. Most of his drafting table remained exactly where he'd left it. The pencils were gone. The blueprints had disappeared years ago. But the room still smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I opened every drawer. Cabinets, storage boxes, nothing. No master plans, no structural notes, no engineering files, only copies submitted to the city decades earlier. And I knew something almost no one else did. Those weren't the final drawings. Thomas and I had continued refining the design long after construction permits had been approved. Several critical structural changes had been made during the building process with full engineering approval, but we had kept a separate master set documenting every revision. Only 2 copies had ever existed. One belonged to me, one belonged to Thomas. Mine had disappeared years earlier during an office move. Thomas had smiled when I panicked. Don't worry. I'll keep the other one somewhere nobody will ever throw it away. I had laughed. Where? If I tell you now, he'd teased, it won't be a secret. At the time, it felt like another one of his harmless jokes. Standing alone in his study all these years later, I suddenly realized something. Thomas had never told me where he'd hidden that final set of plans. Not because he forgot, because he never expected to leave before me. I slowly sat down in his old chair. For the first time since hearing Lauren speak with Emily that morning, fear settled deep inside my chest. If those original plans couldn't be found, someone might tear down the very heart of the home Thomas and I had spent a lifetime building. And somewhere inside that house, I couldn't shake the feeling that my husband had left behind exactly what we needed. I just had no idea where to begin looking. That night, I hardly slept. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the storm itself. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of the bedroom Thomas and I had shared for more than 4 decades, replaying every word he had ever spoken about the house. If I tell you now, it won't be a secret. At the time, I had laughed. Now those words echoed through my mind like unfinished instructions. By 6 the next morning, I had given up trying to sleep. I slipped into my robe, brewed a pot of coffee, and carried my mug into Thomas's old study. Very little had changed in that room since the day he died. His drafting table still stood beneath the large north-facing window because he'd always insisted architects deserved natural light. His leather chair remained slightly tilted to one side, exactly the way he preferred it. A shelf full of engineering manuals lined one wall, while dozens of binders filled another. Most people would have seen clutter. I saw 40 years of our lives. I ran my fingers across the edge of the drafting table. Tiny scratches marked the oak surface where Thomas had accidentally cut through tracing paper years ago. I smiled despite myself. "You still owe me a new tabletop," I whispered into the empty room. Talking to him had become a habit after he passed. Not because I expected an answer, because love doesn't disappear simply because one voice becomes silent. I opened the first filing cabinet. Every drawer was meticulously organized. Project contracts, building permits, inspection reports, completed residential designs dating back nearly 35 years. Thomas had always believed paperwork deserved as much respect as craftsmanship. Buildings fade, he often said. Documentation tells their story. For nearly 2 hours, I searched through every folder. Nothing. No final master plans. No handwritten revisions. No duplicate blueprints. Only copies I had already seen countless times. Around 8 o'clock, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Bun appeared at the doorway holding a mug of coffee. "I thought I'd find you here." I smiled. "Old habits." He stepped inside and looked around the room. "I haven't spent much time in here since Dad." His voice faded. "I know." He walked slowly toward the drafting table. "I used to think this room was magical." "It was." He laughed softly. "I remember being 8 years old. You let me draw on leftover blueprints. You drew dinosaurs on structural elevations. They were pretty good dinosaurs. They were terrible dinosaurs." We both laughed. For a brief moment it felt like old times. Then his smile disappeared. "You've been upset." I looked down at the folders spread across the table. "I'm worried. About the remodel. About much more than that." He leaned against the window. "Mom, I know Lauren can be controlling sometimes, but she isn't trying to hurt you." I looked at him carefully. "Do you really believe that?" He hesitated. I think she just gets excited. She throws herself into projects." "I know. But this house isn't a project." He didn't answer. Instead, he studied one of the old blueprints lying open on the desk. "I never realized how much work you and Dad put into this place." I smiled sadly. "You were too young. I thought contractors did everything. We worked alongside them nearly every day." His eyebrows lifted. "Every day? Almost." I closed one of the folders. "Your father took vacation days just to inspect framing." Ben laughed. "That sounds like him." "It does." A comfortable silence settled between us. Finally he asked, "What exactly are you looking for?" I debated whether to tell him. Part of me wanted to keep Thomas's secret. Another part realized I could no longer carry everything alone. "There was another set of plans." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "The city has one version. We had another." His expression changed immediately. "You mean the house wasn't built exactly according to the permit drawings?" "It was built legally. Every structural revision was reviewed. But we continued improving small details during construction. Those changes were documented, just not in the city's archive." He looked genuinely surprised. "I never knew. Very few people did. Where are they?" I smiled weakly. "That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out." Bun looked around the study. "You think Dad hid them?" "I know he did. But I don't know where." He crossed his arms. "If they're that important, why didn't he ever tell me?" "Because they weren't important. Until now." Ben slowly nodded. "I'll help you look." His offer warmed my heart. "Thank you." He left for work a few minutes later. Before walking out, he paused at the doorway. "Mom." "Yes. I know things have felt different lately, but I don't want you thinking this isn't your home." I smiled. "I appreciate that." He gave me one last reassuring nod before leaving. I wanted desperately to believe him. Unfortunately, actions inside the house had begun saying something entirely different. Later that afternoon, I decided to search the garage. Thomas had built custom storage cabinets along one wall years earlier. Each cabinet was labeled in his neat block handwriting: plumbing, electrical, landscaping, tools. I opened every single one: boxes of nails, old paint samples, extension cords, garden equipment. Nothing. When I reached the final cabinet, I found an old wooden toolbox Thomas hadn't used in years. Inside were measuring tapes, carpenter's pencils, and a faded photograph of the two of us standing beside the house on the day construction finished. We looked impossibly young, covered in sawdust, completely exhausted, absolutely happy. I slipped the photograph into my pocket. Some treasures deserve to stay close. By late afternoon, I had searched nearly every obvious place: the attic, the basement, the garage, the study, even the hall closet where Thomas occasionally stored rolled drawings. Nothing. I was beginning to wonder if grief had somehow distorted my memory. Perhaps there never had been another set. Perhaps I had imagined it. Then something unexpected happened. While organizing a shelf in the basement workshop, I discovered an old cassette recorder. Thomas used it before smartphones existed. Whenever inspiration struck while driving, he'd record ideas instead of writing them down. Curious, I pressed play. Static crackled through the tiny speaker. Then Thomas's familiar voice filled the room. Project Hollister Residence. I froze. The recording continued. Reminder. Move support beam 12 inches west. Kitchen circulation works much better. Another click, another recording. Lucinda prefers the pantry entrance hidden. She's right. Improve sight lines. I laughed through sudden tears. Even decades later, he still sounded exactly like himself. Confident, gentle, thoughtful. I listened to recording after recording. Construction notes, material lists, random ideas, jokes he'd forgotten to erase. Then nearly 40 minutes later, I heard something that made my heart stop. Thomas chuckled before speaking. If anyone besides Lucy ever hears this, he laughed again. It means they finally found my recorder. A long pause followed. I've hidden the final master drawings where they'll stay dry. Static interrupted the recording. I leaned closer. Inside. More static. The tape crackled violently. Kitchen. Then silence. The cassette clicked to an end. No. I quickly rewound it, played it again. The same thing. I've hidden the final master drawings where they'll stay dry. Static. Inside. Stat. Kitchen. End of recording. I stared at the recorder in disbelief. Inside the kitchen. Not near it. Not under it. Inside it. But where I immediately walked upstairs. Lauren wasn't home yet. The kitchen looked exactly as it always had. Warm afternoon sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor. Copper pans hung neatly above the island. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Yet suddenly I wasn't seeing cabinets, or countertops, or appliances. I was seeing possibilities. Thomas had hidden something somewhere in this room, somewhere close enough to survive nearly 30 years, somewhere dry, somewhere nobody would accidentally throw it away. I slowly turned in a complete circle. Every cabinet, every beam, every wall, every inch suddenly felt like part of a puzzle my husband had created decades earlier. And for the first time since Lauren announced her renovation, I wasn't simply afraid anymore. I had hope. Because I knew Thomas. He never built anything without a purpose. And if he'd hidden those plans inside the kitchen, then sooner or later the kitchen itself would reveal his secret. For the next 3 days, the house felt strangely suspended between two futures. No one argued. No one apologized. Lauren buried herself in phone calls with suppliers and clients, insisting the renovation was only temporarily delayed. Ben spent long hours upstairs working, though. I often caught him staring absently out his office window. Emily emailed Jack updated measurements every evening, hoping some overlooked detail might explain the inconsistencies. Nothing did. Every new measurement only reinforced the same conclusion. The permit drawings did not match the house standing around us. On Thursday morning, Jack called. Mrs. Hollister. Good morning, Jack. I'd like to come back. Did you find something? I found a question. I smiled despite my anxiety. My husband used to say questions are more valuable than answers. Jack chuckled. I think I would have liked him. When can you come? I'm already outside. I looked through the front window. His truck sat at the curb. 5 minutes later, he was standing in the kitchen beside Emily, both studying the ceiling beam again. Lauren crossed her arms. I thought we'd finished the inspection. We did, Jack replied calmly. Now I'm investigating. What's the difference? The inspection told me something doesn't fit. The investigation tells me why. He slowly walked around the kitchen island, his fingertips lightly brushing the oak countertop. This island. He looked at me. You and your husband built it during construction, didn't you? I nodded. We modified the original design. I thought so. Emily glanced up from her tablet. The measurements don't align with the permit set. Jack smiled. Exactly. Lauren sighed. I still don't understand why this matters. Jack looked toward her. Because every unusual decision has a reason. He walked over to the large pantry wall beside the refrigerator. Then he stopped. Without saying anything, he crouched and examined the baseboard closely. What is it? Ben asked. Jack pointed. This trim. Emily leaned down. It doesn't match. No. It's older than the surrounding wood. I felt a chill. Thomas had installed that section himself. Jack gently tapped the wall. Solid. Then another section. A slightly different sound. He stood again. Emily. Stud finder. She handed him a small electronic device. He slowly passed it across the wall. The screen beeped repeatedly. Then suddenly, silence. Jack frowned. That's odd. What? There should be a stud here. He moved the scanner again. Still nothing. Lauren folded her arms impatiently. Could the scanner be wrong? It could. So let's verify. He retrieved a rubber mallet from his toolbox. Very gently, he tapped 3 different places. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Then, hollow. Everyone looked at each other. Ben spoke first. Did anyone hear that? Jack nodded. I did. Emily stepped closer. There's empty space behind this section. Lauren shook her head. Impossible. The plans don't show any cavity there. Jack smiled faintly. Exactly. He carefully removed a narrow piece of decorative trim near the floor. Behind it appeared an almost invisible seam. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Thomas, what did you do? Jack looked at me. Mrs. Hollister. Do I have your permission to open this? I swallowed. Yes. But carefully. I always do. Using a thin pry tool, he slowly eased the panel outward. It resisted at first. Then with a quiet click, the entire section shifted nearly half an inch. Emily gasped. It's a concealed panel. Lauren stared in disbelief. What? Jack pulled gently. The wooden panel swung open like a narrow hidden door. Inside, there was no secret room, only a vertical storage compartment built neatly between the framing members. The space was barely 6 inches wide, just enough to hold something long and narrow. Everyone leaned closer. It was empty. Lauren let out a long breath. So, nothing. Jack didn't move. Instead, he reached inside and aimed his flashlight upward. His expression changed immediately. What is it? Ben asked. Jack didn't answer. He reached farther into the compartment. His fingers brushed something hidden near the top. Slowly, very slowly, he pulled downward. A dusty metal cylinder emerged from the darkness. My breath caught. I knew that cylinder. Blue-gray steel, brass end caps. Exactly the kind of blueprint storage tube Thomas always preferred. Jack held it carefully in both hands. The room became perfectly silent. Even Lauren stopped breathing for a moment. The tube was covered in decades of dust, but one detail remained perfectly clear. A small strip of masking tape. Across it, written in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting, Master Set. Emily whispered, "Oh my goodness." Jack turned toward me. Mrs. Hollister, I think this belongs to you. For several seconds, I couldn't move. It felt as though 30 years had collapsed into a single moment. My hands trembled as I accepted the tube. The metal felt cold, heavier than I expected, almost sacred. Ben stepped closer. Mom. I carefully brushed away the remaining dust. Another line of handwriting appeared beneath the first. For Lucinda only if necessary. My eyes filled instantly. Thomas, you impossible man, you actually did it. Lauren stared at the writing. You knew about this. I slowly shook my head. I knew he hid something. I never knew where. Jack smiled quietly. Smart place. Dry. Protected. Almost impossible to discover accidentally. Emily laughed softly. He designed the hiding place while designing the house. I think he did. Jack looked genuinely impressed. I've renovated hundreds of homes. I've never seen anything like this. Ben reached toward the tube. Can we open it? I hesitated. For just a moment, I wanted to be alone with it. Just Thomas and me. But this wasn't only about us anymore. I nodded. Jack cleared the dining table. Emily gently spread a clean cotton drop cloth across the surface. I slowly unscrewed the brass cap. It resisted slightly before finally loosening. Everyone watched in complete silence. Inside rested a tightly rolled stack of large blueprints, perfectly preserved. The paper remained surprisingly white despite its age. I carefully lifted the roll onto the table. As it slowly unfurled, dozens of handwritten notes appeared across the pages. Not computer print, not photocopies, original pencil markings, Thomas's handwriting, mine, dates, measurements, engineering calculations, personal notes written in the margins. Ben leaned closer. I've never seen these. Emily's eyes widened. Neither have I. Jack studied the first sheet, then the second, then the structural pages. His eyebrows rose higher with every drawing. Finally, he looked directly at me. Mrs. Hollister, these aren't just revisions. No, they're the actual construction documents. I nodded quietly. Yes. He pointed toward one page. Every structural change is documented. Emily quickly compared them with her digital files. Oh my gosh. She looked up. The permit set is missing nearly 20 major revisions. Jack gave a slow whistle. And every one of them affects the load path. Lauren's face lost all color. What does that mean? Jack answered gently. It means... He placed one finger on the drawing of the kitchen. The wall you wanted removed. He traced another line. And part of this island. Then another. Are all working together. He looked directly at her. If we'd followed your renovation drawings. A long silence followed. Finally, Lauren whispered, what would have happened? Jack didn't exaggerate. He simply answered with quiet honesty. Eventually, the ceiling would have begun to sag. The roof loads would have shifted. You might not notice for months. But over time, he paused, you could have caused severe structural damage. No one spoke. Emily slowly closed her laptop. I should have questioned the permit drawings sooner. Jack shook his head. You couldn't have known. He looked back at the blueprints spread across the table. These changed everything. I rested my hand gently on Thomas's familiar handwriting. For the first time since he died, it felt as though he was standing beside me again. Not as a memory, but as the architect who had anticipated a problem 30 years before anyone else could. And somehow, he had found a way to protect our home long after he was gone. No one left the dining room for nearly an hour. The blueprints covered almost the entire oak table, where my family had once shared birthday cakes, Thanksgiving dinners, and quiet Sunday breakfasts. Now those same boards held a different kind of history, not memories, evidence. Jack carefully weighted the corners of each drawing with unopened books so the brittle paper wouldn't curl. Emily stood beside him, comparing every handwritten revision to the scanned permit files displayed on her tablet. Ben silently watched, trying to understand a language that had shaped his childhood without him ever noticing. Lauren remained at the opposite end of the room. She hadn't spoken since Jack explained what could have happened if her renovation had moved forward. I noticed something unfamiliar in her expression. For the first time since she moved into our home, certainty had disappeared. Jack adjusted his reading glasses. Emily. She looked up. Page 6. Emily slid another blueprint toward him. He traced several red pencil marks. See these notes? She nodded. They're structural revisions. Exactly. He pointed to a series of arrows. The original permit drawings transferred roof loads through the dining room wall. His finger moved toward another handwritten note. But these revisions redirect those loads. Emily leaned closer. To the kitchen island. Jack smiled. And not just the island. He tapped the oversized beam running above the kitchen opening. That beam. The hidden steel brackets. The reinforced foundation beneath the island. They all work together. Ben frowned. I don't understand. Jack looked at him kindly. Imagine a bridge. If you remove one cable because you think another cable is doing the work, he paused. The entire bridge changes. Ben slowly nodded. So, the island isn't furniture. No, Jack answered. It's part of the structure. Emily looked genuinely impressed. I've never seen residential engineering done quite like this. I smiled faintly. Thomas hated wasting space. Jack chuckled. I can tell. He disguised structural supports as everyday architecture. Emily added quietly. That's brilliant. I looked down at Thomas's handwriting spread across the table. He always believed beauty and engineering should never compete. They should help each other. Jack nodded approvingly. I wish more architects thought that way. Lauren finally spoke. So, you're saying, my entire design is impossible? Jack considered his answer carefully. No. I'm saying your design ignored how this house actually works. She crossed her arms. But open-concept kitchens are standard now. Jack smiled politely. Standards don't matter. Physics does. The room fell silent again. Emily continued reviewing another sheet. Suddenly she stopped. Jack! What? Look at this. She pointed toward a handwritten paragraph near the bottom corner of one blueprint. The note wasn't technical. It had been written in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting. Jack adjusted his glasses. Then he read aloud. Future renovations must begin with this master set only. Permit copies do not reflect final structural integration. Any contractor working without these revisions risks compromising the home's stability. Every person in the room became perfectly still. Ben stared at the note. Dad wrote that. I nodded. That's his handwriting. Emily whispered. He anticipated this. Jack folded his arms thoughtfully. He anticipated someone remodeling decades later. Lauren slowly sat down. She looked genuinely shaken. I didn't know. No, I answered quietly. You didn't. She looked at me. I wasn't trying to destroy your house. I believe you. I honestly thought I was improving it. I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated. Intentions matter. Consequences matter too. Jack broke the silence. Nobody here acted maliciously. He looked at Lauren. You hired professionals. You obtained permits. That's responsible. Then he looked toward me. But Mrs. Hollister possessed information no public record contained. He smiled. Information her husband wisely protected. Ben rubbed his forehead. I can't believe Dad planned this. I laughed softly. Oh, I can. Everyone turned toward me. You have to understand Thomas. If he saw a possible problem, he solved it. Even if that problem might not appear for 30 years. Ben smiled through watery eyes. That sounds exactly like him. I reached across the table and gently touched one corner of the blueprint. Every Friday night. Emily asked. For almost 20 years after the house was finished. Thomas and I still reviewed these plans. Lauren looked surprised. You kept redesigning the house. Not redesigning. Learning. Every season we noticed something. Better sunlight. More efficient drainage. Safer railings. Easier aging. Jack nodded approvingly. That's what great architects do. They never stop observing. I smiled. Thomas once told me, a finished house is simply the first draft of a lifetime. Jack laughed. I may steal that quote. Please do. Emily continued turning pages. Then another detail caught her attention. Jack, there's more. What now? She pointed towards several pages filled with color-coded markings. Every revision is signed. Jack examined them. Thomas Hollister. Then another signature. He looked toward me. And Lucinda Hollister. Emily smiled. You approved every change together. I nodded. We never made structural decisions separately. Lauren quietly watched me. I never knew you were... She hesitated. That involved. Ben looked confused. What do you mean? Lauren sighed. I guess. I always imagined your dad designed the house. And your mom... She stopped. I smiled gently. Decorated it. Lauren looked embarrassed. I suppose. Jack couldn't help smiling. I've worked with husband and wife architecture firms. Never underestimate the wife. Emily laughed. Most of my professors would have agreed. Lauren looked down at the blueprints. I'm sorry. No one answered immediately. Perhaps because the apology wasn't complete yet. Perhaps because all of us were still processing what these drawings represented. Jack carefully rolled one blueprint halfway closed before stopping again. Hold on. He leaned closer to another handwritten note. Mrs. Hollister. Yes. Did you intentionally overbuild the foundation beneath the island? Yes. Why? I smiled. Thomas insisted one day we'd have grandchildren climbing all over it. Emily laughed. So you designed for jumping children, and dancing teenagers, and large Thanksgiving dinners, and elderly knees. Jack shook his head in admiration. You built for generations. That was always the plan. Lauren quietly whispered, I built for photographs. The words hung heavily in the room. No one mocked her. No one criticized her. Because she already understood the difference herself. Emily finally closed her tablet. I've finished comparing everything. And? Jack asked. She looked directly at Lauren. There isn't a single major structural element on your renovation drawings that doesn't require revision. Lauren swallowed. So, we start over. Jack nodded. From the beginning. She looked toward me. I suppose... She hesitated. I suppose that means... She couldn't finish the sentence. Jack finished it for her. It means the only person who fully understands this house. He looked directly at me. Is Mrs. Hollister. Everyone turned toward me. For months I had felt invisible, ignored, managed, scheduled, corrected, treated like an elderly woman occupying space someone else wanted to redesign. Yet suddenly no one saw an inconvenience. They saw the architect. Jack carefully gathered the blueprints. I'll make high-resolution copies. The originals never leave this house. I appreciated that. They stay with me. As they should. Lauren slowly stood. I need some air. Without waiting for anyone to respond, she walked quietly out the back door. Through the kitchen window, I watched her stop beneath the old maple tree. The same tree Thomas had planted the week we moved in. She stood there for a long time staring back at the house. Not with frustration, not with anger, but with the unmistakable expression of someone realizing she had spent months trying to change something she had never truly understood. And for the first time since all of this began, I believed the blueprints had done more than protect our home. They had forced everyone inside it to finally see the people who built it. That evening, after Jack and Emily left, with digital scans of the master drawings, the house settled into an unfamiliar silence. Not the comfortable silence Thomas and I had once shared. This one carried the weight of unfinished conversations. Lauren stayed upstairs. I heard her bedroom door close shortly after dinner and remain closed for the rest of the evening. Ben wandered through the first floor as though seeing it for the very first time. He paused beside the oversized beam above the kitchen opening, ran his hand along the edge of the island, looked down at the hardwood floor beneath his feet. Finally, he found me in the living room. I was sitting in Thomas's old armchair with the original blueprints resting inside a protective portfolio on my lap. Mom. I looked up. Yes. Can we talk? I smiled gently. I've been hoping we would. He sat across from me but didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stared at the portfolio. I don't know what to say. You don't have to know. I feel, he searched for the right word. Embarrassed. I tilted my head. Why? Because I lived in this house my whole life. I thought I knew everything about it. His eyes drifted toward the kitchen. I didn't even know you designed it. His words didn't sound accusing, they sounded ashamed. I took a slow breath. That's partly my fault. He looked surprised. How? I never talked much about work, he frowned. But why? I smiled sadly. Because when you were little, I wanted to be your mother when I came home. Not your architect, he laughed softly. I remember Dad bringing home blueprints. I don't remember yours. I left mine at the office. You deserved a mother who wasn't always working. His eyes filled slightly. I would have been proud. You didn't need to protect me from that. The sentence lingered between us. Maybe he was right. Maybe without realizing it, I had spent years shrinking parts of myself. Not because anyone asked me to, because that's what many women of my generation learned to do. We celebrated everyone else's accomplishments, quietly folded our own into drawers. Ben leaned forward. I always told people Dad built houses. He did. But he never corrected anyone. He never corrected them because he knew the truth. I smiled. And so did I. He rubbed the back of his neck. I've spent the last 3 years watching Lauren reorganize everything. I kept telling myself it wasn't important. I know. I kept thinking. He stopped. What? That if nobody argued, everything would work itself out. I looked toward the dark kitchen. Peace isn't always the same thing as harmony. He nodded slowly. I understand that now. Another silence followed. This one felt different. Not awkward. Honest. Finally, Ben asked, Can I see the blueprints? I carefully opened his portfolio. He moved beside me instead of remaining across the room. Together we spread several pages across the coffee table. His eyes widened immediately. There are handwritten notes everywhere. Your father hated empty margins. Ben laughed. Looks like you did too. I pointed toward one corner. See that? He leaned closer. A tiny pencil sketch showed the outline of the kitchen. Next to it, Thomas had written, Lucy insists the island should be 6 inches longer. She's probably right. Ben smiled. So who won? I did. You usually did. Only when I actually was right. He laughed again. The sound reminded me of him as a teenager. Then he turned to another page. Near the center of the drawing was a coffee stain. What's this? I smiled immediately. Oh, I remember that. Really? Your father knocked over his mug. He was convinced the plans were ruined. But I framed that sheet in my office for years. Why? Because perfection isn't what makes something valuable. He looked thoughtfully at the stain. I wish I'd heard you say things like that growing up. I looked at him. I probably should have. He continued studying the drawings. Then something caught his attention. Mom. What? There are initials beside almost every revision. I nodded. T.H. Thomas Hollister. He pointed to another set. And L.H. Lucinda Hollister. He stared at the pages for a long time before speaking again. You were partners. The simplicity of his statement nearly broke my heart. Yes. We were. I don't think I ever realized that. His voice cracked slightly. I always thought Dad led the projects. He often presented them. But we designed together. He looked down again. I'm sorry. For what? For never asking. Before I could answer, the front door opened. Lauren returned from outside. She stopped when she saw us surrounded by blueprints. For a brief moment, she looked uncertain whether to join us. Then she quietly walked into the living room. I don't want to interrupt. You aren't. She looked at Ben. Can we talk later? He nodded. In a little while. She noticed one blueprint lying open. Her eyes settled on the coffee stain. That's actually kind of beautiful. I smiled. It wasn't intentional. The best things rarely are. She stood silently for another few seconds before speaking again. I've been thinking. Neither Ben nor I answered. She continued. When I first walked into this house 3 years ago, I saw possibilities. She looked around the room. Today I realized something. What? I asked. I only saw empty spaces. I never saw the stories. Her voice carried none of its usual confidence, only regret. I thought those built-in shelves were old-fashioned. She looked toward the hallway. I didn't know Ben used to hide behind them while playing with his friends. Ben smiled faintly. I spent hours there. Lauren nodded. I thought the breakfast nook wasted space. She turned toward me. I didn't know that's where your husband drank tea during chemotherapy. I looked down. I never told you. No, you didn't. She paused. But I also never asked. No one spoke for several moments. Then Lauren quietly sat in the armchair opposite us. I grew up moving every 2 years. Ben looked at her. I know. My parents chased jobs. Better neighborhoods. Bigger houses. She shrugged. I never stayed anywhere long enough for a house to become. She searched for the word. Part of me. I understood then. To Lauren, houses had always been investments, projects, design opportunities. To Thomas and me, they had been living memories. Neither perspective was completely wrong, but one of them had forgotten the people inside the walls. Lauren looked at me. When I planned the renovation, I kept talking about improving the kitchen. She laughed bitterly. I never realized I was trying to improve the room designed by the woman sitting across from me. I answered honestly. I wish you had known. I wish I had asked. She folded her hands together. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm not even sure I deserve that. But I wanted you to know. Her voice trembled. I understand now why today hurt so much. I appreciated her honesty. But understanding wasn't the same as repairing trust. That would take time. After Lauren went upstairs, Ben remained beside me. He continued studying the blueprints. Then he noticed a thin envelope tucked into the back of the portfolio. I don't remember seeing this. Neither did I. Carefully, I opened it. Inside was a folded letter written in Thomas's familiar handwriting. Across the front, only 6 words appeared. For Ben, when he's finally ready. My hands began to shake. Bun stared at the envelope. Dad wrote something. For me. Neither of us knew what the letter contained. Neither of us opened it that night. Some words deserve the right moment. And somehow, looking at that unopened envelope, I realized my husband had left behind far more than blueprints. He had left a conversation that had been waiting years to begin. Neither Ben nor I opened the letter that night. We simply looked at it resting on the coffee table between us, as though opening it too quickly might somehow disturb the man who had written it. Thomas had always believed timing mattered. He never rushed important conversations. When Ben was 10 and wanted to quit Little League after a difficult season, Thomas didn't lecture him immediately. Instead, he took him fishing the following Saturday. They spent 4 quiet hours on the Columbia River before Thomas finally asked one simple question. Are you quitting because you don't love baseball anymore, or because you're afraid of failing? Ben had returned home with red eyes, muddy boots, and a new determination. That was Thomas. I knew that people heard truth more clearly when they were ready to receive it. So we left the envelope unopened. The following morning I woke before sunrise. The house was still. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel anxious walking into my own kitchen. I rested my hand on the oak island and smiled. You protected us again, I whispered. Whether I was speaking to the kitchen or to Thomas, I couldn't have said. I had just poured my first cup of coffee when Lauren quietly entered. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, and her usually polished appearance had been replaced by a gray sweatshirt and loose ponytail. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. Neither could I. She hesitated before asking, May I sit down? I nodded toward one of the stools. Of course. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, it was uncertain. Finally, Lauren wrapped both hands around the mug I had placed in front of her. I've been looking through my project files all night. And I kept asking myself how I got here. She laughed quietly, though there wasn't any humor in it. I started my business because I loved helping families feel at home. She looked around the kitchen. Somewhere along the way, I started designing houses for magazines instead of the people living in them. I listened without interrupting. I kept chasing cleaner lines, more open space, better photographs. I forgot that beautiful homes are supposed to carry memories. Her voice cracked slightly. I erased yours. I answered honestly. You moved them. I don't think you understood what they meant. She nodded. I understand that now. Before I could respond, Ben came downstairs carrying the envelope. I think, he swallowed. I think I'm ready. I looked at him carefully. Are you sure? He nodded once. If Dad wrote it for me. I don't want to wait anymore. Lauren started to stand. I'll give you two some privacy. Ben surprised both of us. No. I'd like you to stay. She looked uncertain. Are you sure? Yes. If we're going to rebuild this family, I don't want any more secrets. His words settled heavily over the room. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter written on thick cream-colored stationery. The paper smelled faintly of cedar. I immediately recognized it. Thomas had always saved that stationery for important occasions. My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages. Would you like me to read it? I asked. Ben nodded. I don't think I could. I took a slow breath and began. Dear Ben, if you're reading this, then something important has happened in our house. Either your mother finally found the master plans, or you're standing at a crossroads where you need to remember what this home was always meant to be. If it's the first reason, then I owe your mother another apology for hiding those drawings where even she couldn't find them. Tell her I was trying to protect both the plans and the woman who drew half of them. I smiled through tears. Lauren quietly lowered her head. I continued. When people complimented our house, they usually congratulated me. I rarely corrected them. Not because I wanted the credit, because your mother never cared who received it. She only cared that the work was good. Don't ever mistake her silence for the absence of strength. Without her, this house would never have existed. I paused. Ben covered his eyes with one hand. I never knew. I know. I continued reading. You have probably heard people say a man builds a home for his family. That isn't true. A family builds a home together. Brick by brick, decision by decision, sacrifice by sacrifice. Your mother taught me that, not the other way around. Lauren quietly wiped away a tear. I kept reading. There may come a day when someone wants to change this house. That's natural. Homes should grow with the people inside them. But before anyone removes a wall, ask yourself whether they're removing a memory too. Some walls hold more than weight. Some rooms carry conversations that still deserve to be heard. I stopped again. No one spoke. The only sound was the refrigerator humming softly behind us. Then I reached the final page. Bun, one day your mother will need you more than she'll admit. She has spent her life making everyone else feel capable. The danger in loving someone like that is believing they never need protecting. Don't make that mistake. Stand beside her. Not because she's weak, because she stood beside you since the day you were born. Love, Dad. For a long time, none of us moved. Ben stared at the table. Finally, he whispered, I failed him. I immediately reached for his hand. No, you lost your way. There's a difference. He shook his head. I kept telling myself avoiding conflict was keeping peace. I watched little things happen. The pictures, the kitchen, the traditions. I saw them. His voice broke. I didn't stop them. Lauren quietly spoke for the first time. Neither did I. She looked directly at me. I kept thinking I needed to prove I belonged here. I acted like every room had to reflect me. She swallowed. I never asked why the house already reflected someone else. I folded Thomas's letter carefully before answering. You both made mistakes. But mistakes aren't the end of a family. They become the end only when nobody is willing to admit them. Ben nodded slowly. I want to fix this. So do I, Lauren whispered. Just then the front doorbell rang. Jack Morrison stood outside carrying a long cardboard tube. Hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, I replied. He stepped inside. I had the master drawings professionally scanned this morning. He handed me the tube. The originals never left my sight. I thought you'd want these copies. I smiled. Thank you. He looked around the kitchen. Everything all right? Ben answered before anyone else could. I think. He glanced at Lauren and then at me. We've got a lot of rebuilding to do. Jack smiled knowingly. Sometimes rebuilding starts before anyone picks up a hammer. He had no idea how true those words were, because the greatest damage inside our home had never been hidden inside the walls. It had been growing quietly between the people living within them. And for the first time since Lauren called me a guest in my own kitchen, I believed we had finally begun repairing the part of the house that mattered most, our family. After Jack left, I carried Thomas's letter upstairs and placed it inside the top drawer of my nightstand. Not because I wanted to hide it, because some words deserve to rest after changing a person's life. The house felt different over the next few days, not magically healed, just quieter. Lauren no longer rearranged cabinets. She didn't schedule clients to visit the house. The magnetic calendar disappeared from the refrigerator without anyone mentioning it. Little changes, but meaningful ones. Still beneath the calmer surface, something remained unresolved. Apologies had been spoken. Trust had not yet returned. I was standing in the garden trimming roses on Saturday morning when I heard the back door open. Lauren stepped onto the patio. She held 2 mugs of coffee. I thought you might like a break. I accepted one. Thank you. For a while, we simply watched a pair of hummingbirds dart between the flowers. Finally, she spoke. I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times. I smiled gently. Then don't rehearse it anymore. She nodded. I don't think I've ever really told you who I was before I married Ben. I leaned against the porch railing. I'm listening. She stared into her coffee. My father lost his construction company when I was 14. I hadn't known that. He borrowed too much money during the housing crash. When everything collapsed, she swallowed. We lost our house. I'm sorry. We moved 5 times in 4 years. Every new place was smaller, cheaper, temporary. She laughed bitterly. I stopped hanging pictures on bedroom walls because I knew we'd just take them down again. Suddenly, many things began making sense. She continued quietly. My mother used to say, she paused before repeating the words, never get attached to a house, houses leave. I felt my heart soften. What did you believe? I believed if I ever owned a beautiful home, I'd never feel powerless again. She looked toward our kitchen window. When Ben and I moved here, I saw the nicest house I'd ever lived in. I thought making it perfect would finally make me feel secure. And did it? She shook her head slowly. No. It only made me more afraid. Afraid of what? That I'd never truly belong. Those words surprised me. You thought you didn't belong? She nodded. It was your home, your memories, your traditions, your recipes, your neighbors. I felt like an outsider. I considered that carefully. And instead of joining the story, I tried to rewrite it. She answered before I could. Yes. There it was. Not cruelty. Fear. Fear wearing expensive clothes and carrying renovation plans. I took a sip of coffee. I wish you had told me. I was embarrassed. Why? Because it sounded childish. She smiled sadly. I'm almost 40 years old. I shouldn't still be trying to prove I deserve a home. I looked at the roses Thomas had planted years earlier. We all carry something from childhood. Some people carry confidence. Others carry fear. What matters is whether we recognize which one is making our decisions. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I wish I'd recognized mine sooner. Before I could answer, Ben stepped onto the patio. He looked nervous. I've been looking for both of you. What is it? I asked. He took a deep breath. I called my office yesterday, and I asked to switch to part-time remote work for a while. Lauren looked surprised. You did? He nodded. I've spent too many years hiding behind work. He looked at me. I don't want to do that anymore. I smiled warmly. You don't have to change your career because of me. I'm not. I'm changing how I show up for my family. His words reminded me so much of Thomas that for a moment I almost turned expecting to see my husband standing nearby. Ben looked at Lauren. I owe you an apology too, she blinked. You do. I kept making you solve everything alone. I avoided difficult conversations. I left you carrying every decision. She shook her head. I didn't exactly make it easy. No. But marriage isn't about waiting for the other person to become perfect. He smiled weakly. I should have spoken up months ago. Lauren reached for his hand. I should have listened months ago. Watching them, I realized something important. Neither of them was the villain I had imagined during my darkest moments. They were two frightened people making poor decisions for completely different reasons. That didn't erase the hurt, but it explained it. Later that afternoon, Jack called asking if he could stop by. I finished reviewing every structural revision. Any surprises? He laughed. Several. An hour later, he spread new copies of the blueprints across the dining table. Emily joined him carrying updated engineering calculations. Jack pointed toward the kitchen. The good news is, we can absolutely renovate. Lauren looked hopeful. Really? Yes. But not the way originally planned. Emily smiled. There's actually a much better solution. She showed us a revised drawing. The kitchen remained recognizable. The historic island stayed exactly where it was. The hidden structural system remained untouched. However, the pantry gained better storage. The breakfast nook became brighter with larger windows. Accessibility improvements were added without removing the character of the house. I studied the drawing carefully. It's elegant, Jack smiled. I borrowed a few ideas from the master plans, Emily added, and a few from Lauren's original concepts. Lauren looked surprised. You kept some of my ideas. Emily nodded. They weren't bad ideas. They were just working against the house instead of with it. Jack looked around the table. Good design isn't about winning. It's about listening. His words settled over all of us. Listening. That had been missing from our family for months, maybe years. As everyone discussed cabinet layouts and lighting, I quietly walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, the old maple tree cast moving shadows across the backyard. Thomas used to stand there every autumn, coffee in hand, watching the leaves fall. I could almost hear him, not in some supernatural way, simply through memory. He would have loved this conversation. Not because people were finally praising his engineering, because they were finally listening to one another. Lauren walked over beside me. I'd like to ask you something. What is it? If. She hesitated. If we move forward with the renovation. She looked almost afraid of my answer. Would you help design it with me? I turned toward her. You want my help? I don't. She smiled through tears. I need it. I looked back toward the dining room where Ben, Jack, and Emily were still studying the drawings. Months earlier, Lauren had wanted to transform the house without me. Now she was asking me to build its future beside her. That didn't erase everything that had happened. Healing rarely works that way. But it felt like the first truly honest step forward. I smiled. Only on one condition. She looked nervous. What condition? We're going to build a kitchen that every generation feels belongs to them. She didn't hesitate. Deal. For the first time since she had called me a guest in my own kitchen, it felt possible that one day neither of us would feel like guests there again. The room filled with gentle laughter. It felt unfamiliar. Good unfamiliar. Emily spread a fresh sheet of tracing paper over the master plans. Mrs. Hollister. Please, I interrupted. Call me Lucinda. She smiled. Lucinda, where would you begin? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked into the kitchen alone. Everyone quietly watched me. I stood beside the island and closed my eyes. For a moment, I wasn't 67 years old anymore. I was 38. Thomas was standing near the stove with a pencil tucked behind one ear. Bun was 8 years old, sitting at the counter doing homework while stealing chocolate chips from the mixing bowl. The smell of cinnamon bread drifted through the room. Laughter echoed off the walls. When I opened my eyes again, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I walked back into the dining room. We're asking the wrong question. Lauren frowned. We are, yes. We keep asking how to redesign the kitchen. Emily tilted her head. What should we ask instead? How do we help the kitchen continue doing what it was built to do? Silence settled over the table. Jack slowly smiled. Now that's an architect talking. I pointed toward the old drawings. This room was never designed around cabinets. It was designed around people. I picked up one of Thomas's notebooks. He divided our priorities into 3 groups. I turned the pages until I found what I was looking for. Safety. Conversation. Memory. Lauren leaned forward. Memory, I nodded. Thomas believed every room should encourage people to create memories. He hated homes that looked perfect but felt empty. Emily quietly wrote the 3 words at the top of a blank page. Safety, conversation, memory. We start there, she said. For the next 2 hours, we talked about something none of us had discussed before. Not countertops, not paint colors, not appliances. We talked about how we actually lived. Bun admitted that he loved sitting at the island because it reminded him of doing homework while I cooked dinner. Lauren confessed that she often baked late at night when she felt overwhelmed because kneading dough calmed her anxiety. Emily admitted she always dreamed of designing homes where grandparents could comfortably cook beside grandchildren. Jack surprised everyone. My wife has arthritis, he said quietly. The biggest mistake people make is waiting until someone struggles before making a house easier to use. I looked at him. So that's why you asked about accessibility. He nodded. I've watched too many families remodel twice. Lauren slowly turned toward me. I never asked what mattered to you. No. I was too busy deciding. She reached into her binder and removed the glossy rendering of her original renovation. The sleek white kitchen, the oversized marble island, the floating shelves, the dramatic lighting. She looked at it for several seconds, then quietly folded the page in half. I'm letting this go. No one asked you to. I'm asking myself. She placed it aside. I don't want a magazine kitchen anymore. I want ours. Something inside me softened. Not because she abandoned her ideas, because she finally understood the difference between impressing strangers and welcoming family. Around lunchtime, Jack asked everyone to step into the kitchen. I want to show you something. He pointed toward the island. Most people think this is the center of the room. It isn't. Emily looked puzzled. What do you mean? He stretched a tape measure from one doorway to another, then another, then another. The measurements all intersected at a single point, right in front of the old kitchen sink. This, Jack said, tapping the floor gently with his boot, is where everyone naturally stops. Ben looked surprised. He's right. Lauren nodded. I always end up standing here. I smiled. So did Thomas. Jack continued. You don't design around cabinets. You design around human movement. He looked toward me. I suspect that's exactly what the 2 of you did. It was. Thomas had once spent an entire Saturday watching our friends move through the unfinished house, making tiny notes every few minutes. At the time, I thought he was being obsessive. Now I understood. He had been designing for life, not photographs. Emily suddenly laughed. I've been practicing architecture backwards. Lauren looked at her. What do you mean? I've been drawing beautiful kitchens. I should have been studying beautiful families. No one laughed, because every one of us knew exactly what she meant. That afternoon, while Jack reviewed structural notes, Lauren approached me carrying one of Thomas's old notebooks. I found something. What is it? She handed it to me. A page had been folded over. Written across the top in Thomas's handwriting were the words, "Questions worth asking before every remodel." Below them was a short list. Who gathers here? Who feels welcome here? What memories deserve protecting? What can become easier without losing what matters? Lauren read the questions slowly. Then she looked at me. I never asked any of these. I gently closed the notebook. Neither do most people. She smiled sadly. I measured every wall. But I never measured how people felt. For the rest of the afternoon, we redesigned the kitchen together. The island remained. The structural beams stayed exposed as a tribute to the original engineering. The pantry gained pull-out shelving that would be easier for aging knees. The breakfast nook became brighter with larger windows overlooking Thomas's maple tree. Lauren suggested hidden charging stations. Emily improved the lighting. Jack refined the structural details. I added wider walkways and lower storage for accessibility. Ben quietly watched all of us. Finally, he smiled. I've never seen four people argue so politely. Jack laughed. We're not arguing. We're designing. As the sun began setting, Emily printed the preliminary concept. She placed it beside the original master drawing. The similarities were obvious. So were the differences. It wasn't Thomas's kitchen anymore. It wasn't Lauren's kitchen either. It belonged to every chapter the family had lived, and every chapter still waiting to be written. Lauren studied the drawing for a long moment before speaking. I think, she smiled through tears, this is the first room I've ever designed that actually feels like home. I looked toward the kitchen, where generations of our family's life had unfolded. For months, I had believed saving the house meant protecting its walls. Now I understood something Thomas had known all along. A home survives because the people inside it learn how to build together again. And for the first time since hearing the words, "You're just a guest in my kitchen," I no longer felt like I was defending my place. I felt like I was helping create a place where none of us would ever have to question whether we belonged. Construction officially began the first Monday in October. For the first time in months, the sound of hammers inside my home no longer filled me with dread. Instead, it sounded like possibility. Jack insisted on one rule before anyone unpacked a single tool. We're renovating around the family's life, he announced during the morning meeting. Not the other way around. Lauren smiled. So we're not living in a construction zone. Jack grinned. No. The construction crew is working inside your home. There's a difference. That simple sentence changed the entire project. Rather than gutting the kitchen all at once, Jack divided the renovation into careful stages. One side of the room always remained usable. Dust barriers were installed with surprising precision. Every evening before leaving, the crew swept the floors until the house felt livable again. It costs a little more, Jack admitted, but people deserve to recognize their own homes when they wake up. I watched his crew carefully during the first week. They respected the house. No one tossed lumber carelessly against the walls. No one leaned tools against Thomas's old bookshelves. Whenever they uncovered an original detail, Jack stopped everyone before moving forward. Take pictures. Label it. Understand why it's here. His younger workers occasionally looked puzzled. One afternoon, I overheard one of them whisper to another, "I've never seen the boss act like this." Jack overheard him. He smiled without embarrassment. That's because you've never worked in a house built with this much love. No one laughed. Instead, they all became just a little more careful. Emily practically moved into the house. Every morning she arrived with coffee and fresh tracing paper. Every evening she left carrying pages filled with handwritten notes. She often sat beside me asking questions about decisions Thomas and I had made decades earlier. Why did you lower this windowsill by 3 inches? So children could see outside while sitting. She immediately wrote it down. What about these cabinet depths? My mother was short. I wanted her to reach everything comfortably. She smiled. I would have never thought of that. You will now. One afternoon, she admitted something that made me unexpectedly proud. I've started changing the way I interview clients. Oh, I used to ask. She flipped through her notebook. What style do you want? And now, tell me about your happiest memory at home. I couldn't help smiling. That's a much better first question. She laughed. I thought so too. Meanwhile, Lauren changed in ways I never expected. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It happened through dozens of quiet decisions. One morning, I walked downstairs expecting to find her reorganizing cabinets again. Instead, I found her carefully hanging our family photographs back along the hallway. Not randomly. Exactly where they had always been. She turned when she heard me. I found old pictures online from Ben's graduation. I matched the order. I walked closer. There was Thomas holding teenage Ben after his high school ceremony. There was our camping trip to Mount Hood. There was our 25th wedding anniversary. Every photograph had returned home. You remembered, she smiled softly. I studied every nail hole. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she quietly said, I don't ever want your memories to end up in the attic again. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Thank you. Another surprise came later that week. Lauren canceled 3 high-paying clients. I overheard the phone conversation by accident. I'm sorry. No. I won't be taking projects this month, she paused. My family needs me. When she hung up, I couldn't help asking, that must have been expensive. She shrugged. It was. Any regrets? She looked toward the kitchen where Ben and Jack were discussing lighting placement. Not even one. Ben changed too. For years he had hidden inside work. Now he seemed determined to make up for lost time. Every afternoon after finishing his remote meetings, he changed into old jeans and work boots before helping the crew. Jack taught him how to install trim. Emily showed him how to read construction drawings. More than once I caught Ben studying Thomas's old notebooks during lunch breaks. One evening he approached me carrying a tape measure. Mom. Yes. I finally understand why Dad loved this. I smiled. What changed? He looked around the kitchen. You don't just build walls. You solve problems people haven't had yet. I laughed. That's exactly what architecture is. He nodded thoughtfully. I've spent 20 years writing software. People only notice it when it breaks. I think houses are the same. That afternoon, Jack called everyone together. I've got something to show you. The crew gathered around the exposed ceiling beam. Jack carefully removed a temporary protective covering. For the first time in decades, Thomas's original joinery became visible. Every connection fit perfectly. No gaps, no unnecessary hardware. Emily stared upward. This is incredible, Jack nodded. Old-growth lumber. Hand-fitted joints. You can't buy craftsmanship like this anymore. One of the younger carpenters quietly asked, should we cover it back up? Jack looked at me. What do you think? I studied the beam. For years it had hidden quietly above our heads carrying loads no one appreciated, much like Thomas, much like so many people whose work only becomes visible after they're gone. I smiled. No. Let's leave part of it exposed. Lauren immediately agreed. It should be seen. Emily quickly sketched a revised ceiling detail. We can incorporate accent lighting. Not dramatic. Just enough for people to notice. Jack smiled. Perfect. Another week passed. The house slowly transformed. The larger windows filled the breakfast nook with warm autumn sunlight. Pull-out pantry shelves glided smoothly. New lighting brightened every work surface without changing the room's character. Nothing felt trendy. Everything felt intentional. Then on Friday afternoon, Jack handed me a sheet of paper. What is this? The final drawing. I looked at the title block. It read, Hollister Residence Renovation. Below it appeared 4 signatures. Lucinda Hollister, Lauren Hollister, Emily Carter, Jack Morrison. I looked up. Where's Ben's signature? Jack smiled. Turn the page. On the back was another note. Construction Coordinator Benjamin Hollister. I laughed. He'll love this. He earned it. Lauren walked over beside me. I have one more request. What is it? She handed me a pen. I'd like you to sign first. I frowned. Why? She looked directly into my eyes. Because this was your house long before it became mine. I signed, then handed her the pen. She signed beneath my name, not above it, not beside it, beneath it. A small gesture, but one filled with respect. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in the nearly completed kitchen. The exposed beam caught the soft glow of the new lighting. The island remained exactly where Thomas and I had designed it. The larger windows overlooked the maple tree swaying gently in the October breeze. It wasn't the same kitchen anymore. It was better. Not because it was newer, because every person who had touched it had finally learned to build with one another instead of against one another. I rested my hand on the smooth oak countertop, for the first time since Thomas died. The kitchen didn't simply remind me of the life we had shared. It reminded me that our family was finally learning how to carry that life forward together. And somehow, I believed Thomas would have looked around this room, smiled that quiet smile of his, and said exactly what he always said whenever a project finally came together. Worth every revision. The renovation officially ended on the first Saturday in November. Jack arrived just after 9 in the morning carrying a small wooden box instead of a toolbox. Emily followed with a camera slung over her shoulder. Ben had spent the previous evening cleaning every window in the house. Lauren had baked cinnamon rolls before sunrise, filling the kitchen with the same warm scent that used to greet Thomas every Sunday morning. As I walked downstairs, I stopped halfway on the staircase. The house looked familiar, not because nothing had changed, because everything that had changed still felt like us. Morning sunlight poured through the enlarged breakfast nook windows, filling the kitchen with a warm golden glow. The exposed Douglas fir beam stretched proudly across the ceiling, no longer hidden behind drywall, but quietly honored for the work it had done for nearly 3 decades. The oak island remained exactly where Thomas and I had placed it all those years ago. Its surface had been carefully refinished, but every tiny dent from family dinners, homework sessions, and Christmas cookie marathons remained. Jack had refused to sand them away. "They're not damage," he'd told the crew. "They're history." I ran my fingers across one small scratch near the corner. Ben noticed. "You remember that one?" I smiled. "You were 12. You tried to carve a pumpkin in the kitchen." He laughed. "And Dad told me knives weren't toys." I was more worried about the countertop. He definitely was. The kitchen filled with laughter. Real laughter. Not the polite kind we'd forced for months. Jack cleared his throat dramatically. "I've got one final inspection." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "I thought everything passed." "It did. This one's different." He looked around the room. "I want everyone standing where they naturally belong." Emily laughed. "What does that even mean?" "You'll see." Jack gently guided each of us. He asked Ben to stand beside the coffee maker, Lauren near the pantry, Emily beside the new breakfast nook. He motioned for me to remain at the island. Then he stepped backward until he reached the dining room. He folded his arms. "Now. Nobody move." We looked at one another curiously. Finally, Jack smiled. "Do you notice something?" No one answered. He pointed toward the center of the room. Nobody had to be told where to stand. Emily slowly looked around. "We all just ended up where we naturally go." Jack nodded. "Exactly. The kitchen works." Lauren tilted her head. "What do you mean? A good kitchen doesn't force people together. It quietly invites them." He smiled. "I'd say this one passed." Emily quietly snapped a photograph. "I don't think I'll ever forget this project." Ben looked around thoughtfully. "Neither will I." Jack set the small wooden box onto the island. "I've got one last gift." "For who?" I asked. "For the house." He opened the lid. Inside rested a polished brass plaque. Simple, elegant. It read, "Hollister Family Kitchen. Originally designed by Thomas Hollister and Lucinda Hollister, renovated together, 2026. Beneath that, in smaller letters, "Some homes are built with lumber. The best ones are built with love." Lauren covered her mouth. Emily wiped away a tear. I couldn't speak. Jack looked slightly embarrassed. "My crew wanted to do something. You've given us more than a construction project. You reminded us why we build." I finally found my voice. "Thank you." Ben placed one hand on Jack's shoulder. "Dad would have loved you." Jack smiled quietly. "I wish I'd met him." After everyone admired the plaque, Emily carefully mounted it inside the pantry entrance where it could be seen without dominating the room. Thomas would have approved. He never liked unnecessary attention. The afternoon slowly turned into a celebration. Neighbors stopped by. Nancy and Carol came carrying homemade pies. Several members of Jack's crew visited with their families. The kitchen filled with conversations overlapping one another. exactly as it had been designed to do. At one point, I found myself standing beside the sink washing dishes, out of habit. Lauren gently touched my arm. "What are you doing?" "Washing up," she smiled. "Not today. It's my turn." I laughed. "There are enough dishes for both of us." She looked at me for a long moment, then quietly said, "I owe you something first." She reached into a nearby drawer. When she turned back toward me, she was holding a small brass key. I recognized it immediately. It was the decorative key that locked the old cabinet beneath the island. Years earlier, I'd stored family recipes there. Lauren placed it in my hand. "I've been keeping this since we reorganized the kitchen." I looked at her. "I shouldn't have." "No, you shouldn't have." She took a slow breath. "When I called you a guest," her voice shook, "I acted like this room belonged to me. It never did." She gently closed my fingers around the key. "I'm giving it back." The entire kitchen had grown quiet. I hadn't even noticed everyone watching. I looked at the key resting in my palm, then slowly closed Lauren's hand around it again. She looked confused. "Lucinda." I smiled through tears. "I don't want it back." She blinked. "What?" "I don't want one person deciding who belongs in this kitchen." I picked up the key and placed it between both of us on the island. "It belongs to both of us now." Her eyes immediately filled. "I don't deserve that." "Perhaps not," I answered honestly. "But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about deciding what kind of future we want." She began crying openly. Without thinking, she stepped forward and hugged me. Not politely, not cautiously, the kind of hug that comes when pride finally gives up. I hugged her back, for a long time. When we finally stepped apart, Ben quietly wiped his eyes. "I don't think Dad planned this part." I smiled. "No. He planned the house. We're the ones who finally learned how to live in it." Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, the four of us remained sitting around the island. No phones, no blueprints, no renovation schedules, just cups of hot chocolate. Bun looked around the room. "It's strange." "What is?" I asked. "The kitchen feels bigger." Lauren smiled. "We barely changed the square footage." Jack had explained that illusion weeks earlier. I laughed softly. "It isn't bigger. It just has fewer walls between us." No one answered, because we all knew I wasn't talking about construction anymore. Before going to bed, I turned off the kitchen lights one by one. Only the soft accent lighting remained gently illuminating the old Douglas fir beam above us. I looked up one final time. "Good night, Thomas." In the quiet glow, I could almost imagine him smiling. Not because the renovation had been perfect, but because the family he loved had finally remembered the lesson hidden inside every line of those old blueprints. Strong homes are never held together by beams alone. They're held together by the people willing to carry one another. The renovation officially ended on the first Saturday in November. Jack arrived just after 9 in the morning, carrying a small wooden box instead of a toolbox. Emily followed with a camera slung over her shoulder. Ben had spent the previous evening cleaning every window in the house. Lauren had baked cinnamon rolls before sunrise, filling the kitchen with the same warm scent that used to greet Thomas every Sunday morning. As I walked downstairs, I stopped halfway on the staircase. The house looked familiar, not because nothing had changed, because everything that had changed still felt like us. Morning sunlight poured through the enlarged breakfast nook windows, filling the kitchen with a warm golden glow. The exposed Douglas fir beams stretched proudly across the ceiling, no longer hidden behind drywall, but quietly honored for the work it had done for nearly 3 decades. The oak island remained exactly where Thomas and I had placed it all those years ago. Its surface had been carefully refinished, but every tiny dent from family dinners, homework sessions, and Christmas cookie marathons remained. Jack had refused to sand them away. "They're not damage," he'd told the crew. "They're history." I ran my fingers across one small scratch near the corner. Ben noticed. "You remember that one?" I smiled. "You were 12. You tried to carve a pumpkin in the kitchen." He laughed. "And Dad told me knives weren't toys." I was more worried about the countertop. He definitely was. The kitchen filled with laughter. Real laughter. Not the polite kind we'd forced for months. Jack cleared his throat dramatically. I've got one final inspection. Lauren raised an eyebrow. I thought everything passed. It did. This one's different. He looked around the room. I want everyone standing where they naturally belong. Emily laughed. What does that even mean? You'll see. Jack gently guided each of us. He asked Ben to stand beside the coffee maker, Lauren near the pantry, Emily beside the new breakfast nook. He motioned for me to remain at the island. Then he stepped backward until he reached the dining room. He folded his arms. Now. Nobody move. We looked at one another curiously. Finally, Jack smiled. Do you notice something? No one answered. He pointed toward the center of the room. Nobody had to be told where to stand. Emily slowly looked around. We all just ended up where we naturally go. Jack nodded. Exactly. The kitchen works. Lauren tilted her head. What do you mean? A good kitchen doesn't force people together. It quietly invites them. He smiled. I'd say this one passed. Emily quietly snapped a photograph. I don't think I'll ever forget this project. Ben looked around thoughtfully. Neither will I. Jack set the small wooden box onto the island. I've got one last gift. For who? I asked. For the house. He opened the lid. Inside rested a polished brass plaque. Simple, elegant. It read, Hollister Family Kitchen, originally designed by Thomas Hollister and Lucinda Hollister, renovated together, 2026. Beneath that, in smaller letters, some homes are built with lumber. The best ones are built with love. Lauren covered her mouth. Emily wiped away a tear. I couldn't speak. Jack looked slightly embarrassed. My crew wanted to do something. You've given us more than a construction project. You reminded us why we build. I finally found my voice. Thank you. Ben placed one hand on Jack's shoulder. Dad would have loved you. Jack smiled quietly. I wish I'd met him. After everyone admired the plaque, Emily carefully mounted it inside the pantry entrance where it could be seen without dominating the room. Thomas would have approved. He never liked unnecessary attention. The afternoon slowly turned into a celebration. Neighbors stopped by. Nancy and Carol came carrying homemade pies. Several members of Jack's crew visited with their families. The kitchen filled with conversations overlapping one another. Exactly as it had been designed to do. At one point, I found myself standing beside the sink washing dishes, out of habit. Lauren gently touched my arm. What are you doing? Washing up. She smiled. Not today. It's my turn. I laughed. There are enough dishes for both of us. She looked at me for a long moment, then quietly said, I owe you something first. She reached into a nearby drawer. When she turned back toward me, she was holding a small brass key. I recognized it immediately. It was the decorative key that locked the old cabinet beneath the island. Years earlier, I'd stored family recipes there. Lauren placed it in my hand. I've been keeping this since we reorganized the kitchen. I looked at her. I shouldn't have. No. You shouldn't have. She took a slow breath. When I called you a guest. Her voice shook. I acted like this room belonged to me. It never did. She gently closed my fingers around the key. I'm giving it back. The entire kitchen had grown quiet. I hadn't even noticed everyone watching. I looked at the key resting in my palm, then slowly closed Lauren's hand around it again. She looked confused. Lucinda. I smiled through tears. I don't want it back. She blinked. What? I don't want one person deciding who belongs in this kitchen. I picked up the key and placed it between both of us on the island. It belongs to both of us now. Her eyes immediately filled. I don't deserve that. Perhaps not, I answered honestly. But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about deciding what kind of future we want. She began crying openly. Without thinking, she stepped forward and hugged me. Not politely, not cautiously. The kind of hug that comes when pride finally gives up. I hugged her back, for a long time. When we finally stepped apart, Ben quietly wiped his eyes. I don't think Dad planned this part. I smiled. No. He planned the house. We're the ones who finally learned how to live in it. Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, the four of us remained sitting around the island. No phones, no blueprints, no renovation schedules, just cups of hot chocolate. Bun looked around the room. It's strange. What is? I asked. The kitchen feels bigger. Lauren smiled. We barely changed the square footage. Jack had explained that illusion weeks earlier. I laughed softly. It isn't bigger. It just has fewer walls between us. No one answered, because we all knew I wasn't talking about construction anymore. Before going to bed, I turned off the kitchen lights one by one. Only the soft accent lighting remained gently illuminating the old Douglas fir beam above us. I looked up one final time. Good night, Thomas. In the quiet glow, I could almost imagine him smiling. Not because the renovation had been perfect, but because the family he loved had finally remembered the lesson hidden inside every line of those old blueprints. Strong homes are never held together by beams alone. They're held together by the people willing to carry one another. Kết thúc fan bị tốn, tiếp tục yêu cầu viết đủ 200 từ theo quy định viết bằng tiếng Anh. Fan 15. 6 months later, spring arrived in Portland. The maple tree outside the kitchen windows had filled with bright green leaves again, and the garden Thomas loved was beginning to bloom, as though winter had never happened. Life had settled into a rhythm that no longer felt fragile. Not perfect, just honest. Every Thursday morning, Lauren and I baked bread together. She laughed the first time I handed her my mother's old recipe card. Are you sure? I'm very sure. But this recipe has been in your family for decades. So has my son. I smiled. And now your family too. She carefully slipped the recipe card into a protective plastic sleeve before using it. You really don't want flour on this. I laughed. You've learned, she grinned. I had an excellent teacher. Ben kept his promise as well. Instead of disappearing into work every evening, he now shut down his computer at 5 o'clock. No exceptions. Sometimes we cooked together, sometimes we sat on the back porch with coffee, sometimes we simply talked. One evening, he looked around the kitchen and quietly admitted, I spent years believing home was something I already understood. What changed? You. He smiled. I finally listened. Emily visited often, not because the project required it, because she wanted to. Her architecture firm had recently promoted her to lead residential designer. The first thing she did was change the questionnaire every new client completed. She brought me a copy. The first page no longer asked about design styles. Instead, it began with 5 simple questions. Where do your happiest family memories happen? Who gathers in your kitchen? What do you never want to lose? What should become easier? Who will call this home 10 years from now? I looked up at her. You really changed it. You changed it, she smiled. I just wrote it down. Jack officially retired 3 weeks after our renovation ended. His crew surprised him by framing one of the Hollister master blueprints and presenting it during his retirement dinner. He later confessed something that made me laugh. I've become impossible to work with. What do you mean? I keep telling young contractors to ask families about memories before demolition. And they think I'm getting sentimental. I smiled. Maybe you are, he shrugged. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. One Saturday afternoon, Nancy and Carol came over for lunch again. The same lunch that had once ended so awkwardly months earlier. This time the dining room echoed with laughter. Nancy slowly looked around the kitchen. It feels exactly the same. Lauren smiled proudly. That's the nicest compliment anyone's ever given me. Nancy looked confused. I thought everything was renovated. It was. Lauren glanced toward me. We changed almost everything. Without changing what mattered. Nancy nodded thoughtfully. I can see that. After lunch, Lauren surprised everyone. She disappeared upstairs for a few minutes before returning with a beautifully wrapped package. This is for you, Lucinda. You didn't have to buy me anything. I didn't. I slowly opened the wrapping paper. Inside rested a handcrafted leather portfolio. When I opened it, my breath caught. Every original blueprint had been professionally restored, carefully preserved inside archival sleeves. The coffee-stained page remained exactly as it had always been. The pencil marks, the fingerprints, even the tiny crease Thomas had accidentally made years ago. Nothing had been erased, only protected. Tucked inside the front cover was a brass nameplate. Lucinda Hollister, architect, designer, mother, keeper of home. I looked up with tears in my eyes. You made this, Lauren nodded. I kept thinking about something Dad wrote. She still called Thomas Dad now. He said people mistook your silence for the absence of strength. She smiled. I never will again. I couldn't speak. Instead, I hugged her. Not because the portfolio was beautiful, because she finally saw me completely. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I carried the portfolio into Thomas's old study. For the first time since his passing, I rearranged the room. Not because it needed changing, because it was ready for another chapter. The drafting table remained where it had always been. His chair stayed beneath the north window. But beside his framed photograph, I placed the restored portfolio. Not hidden in a drawer, not tucked away in a closet. Visible. Exactly where it belonged. As I stepped back, sunlight filtered through the window onto the brass nameplate. For a moment, I imagined Thomas smiling. Not because his blueprints had survived, because the people he loved had. A few weeks later, Ben hosted our annual family dinner. Relatives filled every room. Children chased one another through the hallway. Someone accidentally spilled lemonade. Someone else burned the dinner rolls. Nobody cared. The kitchen was alive again. At one point, I stepped quietly into the hallway to watch everyone. Lauren stood at the island rolling pie dough with one of our nieces. Ben carved roast chicken beside the stove. Emily laughed while explaining to a cousin why exposed beams weren't just decorative. Jack, now retired, sat at the breakfast nook telling stories to the younger children about old houses. No one noticed me watching. And that made me smile. Because they didn't need me to prove I belonged anymore. They simply assumed I did. Lauren suddenly looked up. There you are. She waved me over. What are you doing all the way over there? I smiled. Watching. She shook her head. No. She gently took my hand. Your place is here. She led me back to the island. Nobody questioned it. Nobody announced it. Someone simply handed me an apron. Someone else passed me the bowl of mashed potatoes. The conversation continued as though I'd never left. Exactly as family should. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone for a few minutes beneath the exposed beam. The house was quiet again. Comfortably quiet. I rested one hand on the old oak island. Months ago, I had stood in this same room after hearing the words, "You're just a guest in my kitchen." At the time, I believed I was fighting to save a house. I was wrong. The house had never needed saving. Thomas had already done that decades earlier. The people inside it did. The blueprints hidden inside the wall hadn't simply protected the structure. They had reminded us of something far more important. Homes aren't inherited because your name appears on a deed. They aren't protected by permits, or beams, or blueprints. A home belongs to the people willing to listen before speaking, to remember before replacing, to forgive before walking away, and to keep choosing one another even after mistakes have been made. As I turned off the kitchen lights, I looked once more toward the brass plaque near the pantry. Some homes are built with lumber. The best ones are built with love. I smiled. Thomas had been right. The kitchen had always been the heart of our family. It just took all of us a little longer than expected to remember how to keep that heart beating.